It is Saturday, February 28, 2026. And, well, if you are in New Delhi right now, the atmosphere is, I mean, electric really doesn't quite cover it.
No, it doesn't.
But even if you aren't in the city, if you've been following Indian politics for the last 4 years or so, you know that today isn't just another standard news cycle. It is a massive, massive shift.
Seismic is probably the only word that actually fits here. We are looking at the abrupt, sudden end of a saga that has basically defined the entire political landscape of the capital since 2021. The ground just shifted under everyone's feet.
Yeah, completely. We're talking, of course, about the Delhi liquor policy case. If you look at your phone right now, the headlines are just flashing the word discharged everywhere.
Yeah.
The Rouse Avenue court has let everyone go. Arvind Kejriwal managed Sisodia, K. Kavith, I mean, the whole lineup. But I want to just pause right here at the top, because I think a lot of people see that word discharge, and they probably think, okay, maybe they got off on a technicality, or wow, the trial is finally over.
And that right there is the single biggest misconception we need to clear up before we go any further into this deep dive. A discharge is not the end of a trial. It actually means the trial never even started.
Okay, unpack that distinction for us.
Yeah.
Because to the layperson, to anyone just watching the news, an acquittal usually comes after you've, fought it out in court, right? You bring your lawyers, the state brings theirs, and the judge eventually decides who wins.
Right, exactly. So in a standard criminal case, the timeline goes like this. You have the investigation, then the charge sheet is filed, and then you have the trial. And the trial is where the evidence is weighed, witnesses are cross-examined, and the truth is kind of hammered out.
Right.
An acquittal means the judge looked at all of that evidence after the trial and said, there's reasonable doubt here. But a discharge is fundamentally different. A discharge is the court looking at the charge sheet before the trial even gets off the ground and saying, there is nothing here.
Nothing, like not even enough to argue about in court.
The specific phrase used by Special Judge Jitendra Singh, and he wrote this massive 598-page order, he said the allegations, quote, failed judicial scrutiny.
Wow.
Yeah, he's saying the evidence the agencies brought was so weak, so legally infirm, that putting these people through the ordeal of an actual trial would just be a total waste of the court's time and, honestly, a violation of their rights.
That is scathing. I mean, it's like showing up for an audition and the casting director says, don't even bother singing, you're not even on the list.
It really is a judicial sledgehammer. Usually, judges are quite restrained in their language. They might say, well, the prosecution failed to prove things beyond a reasonable doubt. But Special Judge Jitendra Singh didn't just dismiss the case. He essentially reprimanded the Central Bureau of Investigation, the CBI, for bringing it in the first place.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to basically act as the postmortem team. We have this massive 598-page order. We have the original CAG reports. We have the entire history of the last 4 years. And we need to figure out, how did an investigation that kept a sitting chief minister in jail for months end up with a judge saying there wasn't even an iota of evidence? We're going to look at the South Group kickbacks that allegedly never happened. We're going to look at the approvers, the witnesses who kept changing their stories.
And we absolutely have to talk about the human cost, because you cannot give back 17 months of a person's life.
Yeah, you can't. So let's start with the verdict itself. You mentioned the judge used really strong language, but judges usually speak in, legal riddles. Was this really that different from a standard not guilty ruling?
Oh, it's night and day. The absolute core of the CBI's case was that there was this grand central conspiracy, a master plan. They painted a picture where the entire Delhi government machinery was hijacked by Kejriwal and Sisodia just to fund their political ambitions.
The kingpin theory. I mean, that was the headline for years, right?
Exactly. The CBI literally called Kejriwal the kingpin. But the court said, I'm quoting directly here, there is, quote, not even an iota of evidence.
Wait, not an iota. That's not even legal jargon. That's just plain English for zero.
It is plain English. The court said there was no money trail leading to Kejriwal whatsoever, no evidence of him receiving a bribe, no evidence of a quid pro quo, meaning doing a specific favor in exchange for money. Just nothing.
But the CBI argued that because he's the chief minister and this liquor policy happened under his watch, he has to be liable. And, I mean, that kind of seems like a logical leap. Like, if I'm the CEO and my company commits massive fraud somewhere down the chain, aren't I responsible?
You might be responsible managerially, sure. You might lose your job. The board might fire you. But criminal liability requires intent. You have to prove criminal intent. And the court made a fascinating distinction here that actually protects the concept of governance itself.
How so?
They said holding a position of power doesn't automatically make you a criminal if a policy turns out to be bad. You can make a terrible policy. You can lose the state money. That makes you a bad administrator, maybe a bad politician. But it does not make you a conspirator in a crime.
Ah, I see. So unless they could prove he did it specifically and intentionally to take a bribe, it's just politics, not a crime.
Precisely. And the CBI completely failed to bridge that gap. But honestly, it gets worse for the agency. The court didn't just let the politicians go. It turned the spotlight right back onto the investigators in a way I have rarely seen in cases like this.
Oh, I saw this in the notes we were looking at earlier, something about a departmental inquiry.
Yes. And this is extremely rare. The court actually recommended a departmental inquiry against the CBI's own investigating officer, the IO of the case.
Why? What did the IO do? Did he just make some procedural mistakes?
It was way more than just mistakes. The court found that the IO had implicated an individual named Kuldeep Singh without any material evidence. None. He just dragged him into the charge sheet.
Wait, just arbitrarily?
Apparently so.
Yeah.
The judge basically said, look, you cannot destroy a citizen's reputation and life based on a hunch or just to pad out your conspiracy theory.
That is terrifying for you and me. I mean, if they can do that to a random individual like Kuldeep Singh, the implications for the bigger names are obvious. It suggests the investigation wasn't really about finding facts, but about fitting people into a pre-written story.
It heavily suggests a pattern of behavior where the end justified the means for the agency. And when the means involve fabricating someone's involvement, the integrity of the entire agency comes into question.
Speaking of fabricating stories, we really need to talk about the South Group, because this was the centerpiece of the whole scandal, right? The famous Rs 100 crore kickback.
Oh, this was the absolute engine of the prosecution's case. Without the South Group, there is simply no case at all. The theory was that a group of politicians and businessmen from South India, including K. Kavitha, Mukunda Srinivasulu Reddy, and some others, paid 100 crore rupees to the AAP.
And in exchange for what exactly?
In exchange, the theory went, the AAP government changed the Delhi liquor policy to increase the profit margins for wholesale liquor distributors from 5% to 12%. The allegation was that this extra 7% margin was the payback mechanism. The wholesalers would get rich, and they'd systematically kick some of that extra money back to the politicians.
Okay, so if the court just discharged everyone, does that mean the South Group, well, didn't exist? Or just that they couldn't prove the money actually moved?
Essentially both. But this brings us to what I think is the most controversial part of this entire 4-year saga, the approvers. And I really need you to pay close attention to this timeline because this is exactly where the CBI's case completely falls apart.
This is the part that always confuses people in the news. An approver is basically a snitch, right? Someone who was involved in the crime but cuts a deal with the cops.
In lay terms, yes. In legal terms, it's an accomplice who is granted a pardon by the court in exchange for making a full and true disclosure of the crime. It's actually a very necessary tool in law enforcement because sometimes only the criminals know how the complex crime was committed.
Sure, that makes sense.
But in this case, the way the approver system was used is deeply troubling. Let's look at Mukunda Srinivasulu Reddy, often called MSR, and his son, Raghav Mukunda.
Okay, lay out the timeline for us.
MSR is a member of parliament. His son, Raghav, was accused of being part of this infamous South Group. So Raghav gets arrested by the Enforcement Directorate, the ED. He applies for bail. The ED fights the tooth and nail in court. They say he's a huge danger to the investigation, he's a flight risk, whatever. Bail is denied. He stays in jail.
Standard procedure so far. You keep the accused in custody while you investigate.
Right. Then time passes. The father, MSR, gives a statement to the agencies. And in this new statement, he finally implicates Arvind Kejriwal. He says, yes, Kejriwal was involved in the kickbacks.
Okay, so he gives them the big name they want.
Yes. And shortly after that statement is given, the son, Raghav, applies for bail again. And this time, the ED, the exact same agency that said he was a critical danger to the case just a while ago, says to the judge, we have no objection to bail.
Wait, no objection? Just because the dad dropped a name?
It looks like a completely straightforward transaction, doesn't it? Give us the kingpin we want and you get your son back.
I mean, that sounds like hostage-taking, not a legal investigation.
The court noticed this exact dynamic. Judge Singh criticized the agencies for what he called repeatedly re-recording statements. Basically, a witness would say something. The agency wouldn't like what they heard. They wouldn't accept it. They'd keep the person in custody, question them again and again and again.
Until the story finally matched the script they had in mind.
Exactly. The court called it an attempt to, quote, fill gaps in the prosecution narrative or to improve the case. The judge pointed out that this severely erodes the sanctity of the truth. Think about it. If I keep you in a jail cell until you say what I want you to say, is that actual evidence? Or is it just coercion?
It's a confession under duress, effectively. It's totally unreliable.
And there was a money trail outside the court case, too, which we have to mention. You remember the electoral bonds data that came out a while back following the Supreme Court order?
Oh, right. The Aurobindo Pharma connection. I remember reading about that.
Yes. Sarath Chandra Reddy, an executive at Aurobindo Pharma, he was another accused in this liquor policy case. He gets arrested. He spends time in jail. Eventually, he turns approver and gives statements against Kejriwal. Then he gets bail. And then public records show that his company donated 5 crore rupees to the ruling BJP via electoral bonds shortly after his arrest.
So let me get this straight. You have corporate money moving to the ruling party via bonds and witness testimony moving against the opposition leader, all while the witness miraculously gets a get-out-of-jail-free card.
It paints a very, very ugly picture of how the investigation was actually conducted on the ground. It suggests the South Group wasn't some airtight criminal conspiracy to bribe the AAP, but rather a convenient group of wealthy people who could be squeezed until they pointed fingers in the right direction.
And what about K. Kavitha? She was the other massive name in the South Group, the BRS leader from Telangana.
Right. The allegations against her were incredibly specific. The CBI claims she was a key player who recouped 14 crore rupees through a sham land deal, and that she paid 80 lakh rupees to her own NGO as part of this laundering scheme. They painted this picture of a very complex money laundering web.
And what did the court say about her part?
Speculative and legally unsustainable. That's the ruling. The court found absolutely no evidence that the land deal was a facade. It was a real deal. Real property changed hands. The money went to real documented places. It was just business. The CBI tried to turn a regular business transaction into a crime scene simply because they needed a link to tie the South Group together.
Speculative, conjecture, surmises. These are the exact words that keep coming up over and over in this 598-page order. It really sounds like the CBI wrote a political thriller novel instead of a legal charge sheet.
It really seems they worked backward. They decided early on there was a massive crime. They identified the political targets they wanted to hit, and then they tried to mold all these disparate facts and business deals to fit that grand narrative. But when a judge finally sat down and looked at the raw material, the mold completely broke.
But hold on a second. I want to play devil's advocate here for you and the listener. The court is saying there's no evidence of a criminal conspiracy. But there was a CAG report. The Comptroller and Auditor General, who is a neutral constitutional body, did say the liquor policy was deeply flawed. They said the state lost a lot of money. So isn't there at least some fire behind all this smoke? That is a vital distinction, and I'm really glad you brought it up because this is exactly where people get confused in the public discourse. You are totally right. The CAG Audit Report number 1 of 2024 was highly critical of the AAP government. They found serious violations in how licenses were awarded. They found a lack of transparency in pricing. They even estimated a potential financial implication of over 2,000 crore rupees.
2,000 crore. That's over $200 million. That's not pocket change. So how is losing 2,000 crores not a crime? If I lose my company that much money, I'm definitely going to jail.
Well, not necessarily. You're getting fired, absolutely. You might get sued in civil court for gross negligence, but you do not go to a criminal prison unless you stole the money. Incompetence isn't a crime under the penal code. Procedural lapses aren't necessarily a criminal conspiracy.
Okay, break that down for us in the context of the policy.
Sure. The CAG pointed out administrative failures. Maybe the government rushed the policy in 2021. Maybe they calculated the wholesaler margins entirely wrong. Maybe the bureaucracy was lazy or inefficient in checking the quality of the vendors. Those are policy failures. Those are administrative failures. The voters should absolutely punish them for that at the ballot box. But the CBI's specific job was to prove that these mistakes were made intentionally and secretly to facilitate a massive bribe.
I see. So the court is basically saying, yes, the policy might have been an absolute mess, but you haven't proved it was a corrupt mess.
Exactly. And to go even further, the court explicitly noted that the policy formulation actually involved institutional safeguards. It went through multi-departmental consultations. Various secretaries looked at it. It wasn't just Manish Sisodia sitting in a dark, smoke-filled room writing a check to himself. It was a formal government process, a flawed one perhaps, but a legal, institutional one.
So the scam part, the kickbacks, the criminal intent, the backroom deals, That was the layer the CBI essentially added on top of the administrative mess.
Right.
And that's the layer that just dissolved in court today.
Yes. And this brings us to a really crucial legal tactic that the agencies used: the mini-trial argument. This gets a bit technical, but stick with me here because it explains the biggest mystery of this case: why Kejriwal and Sisodia were in jail for so long if the evidence was this incredibly weak.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, why didn't this lack of evidence come out 2 years ago when they were first arrested?
Back in 2024, when the AAP leaders were fighting for bail in the Supreme Court, the agencies, the ED and CBI, represented by Solicitor General Tushar Mehta, argued that at the initial stage of arrest, the court shouldn't look too deep into the evidence. They said, "Your Honor, don't conduct a mini-trial right now at the bail stage. Trust us, we have the goods. Just wait for the real trial."
So they used that argument to keep them locked up without actually showing their hand?
Yes. And the courts largely accepted that argument. You have to understand how the PMLA works, the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. The PMLA makes getting bail incredibly, incredibly hard. It puts the burden on the accused person to prove they are innocent before the trial even starts.
Which is almost impossible if you don't even know what evidence they have against you, or if the evidence is just secret statements from approvers sitting in a jail cell.
Exactly. The PMLA effectively reverses the fundamental democratic principle of innocent until proven guilty at the bail stage. It assumes guilt for the purpose of denying bail. So the 2026 verdict we are looking at today is effectively the judge saying, okay, we waited, we denied them bail, we are now finally ready to frame charges and start this trial you promised, show me the goods. And when the agency finally had to open their hands,
The cupboard was totally bare.
empty. The mini-trial argument allowed the investigative agencies to buy time, literal years of time, using the personal liberty of these politicians as currency.
And that segues perfectly into Section 4 of our deep dive, the human cost. Because we could sit here and talk about discharge and legal infirmities and mini-trials,
Yeah.
but Manish Sisodia spent 17 months in a cell. 17 months.
Almost a year and a half, every single day, waking up in Tihar jail. Arvind Kejriwal spent about 5 months in custody.
And it wasn't just the big political names either. We briefly mentioned Vijay Nair, the AAP communication in charge, and Samir Mahindra from Indospirit.
Yes, they were heavily involved in the CBI's narrative, and they were discharged today, too. Just imagine being Vijay Nair. You're a communications guy, a PR professional, you get swept up in this massive national scandal, labeled a master conspirator, and you spend significant time in custody. Your career is halted, your entire reputation is shredded in the national media. And in the end, the judge says, quote, "The allegations rested on conjecture and assumption."
It's chilling. It really is. You lose 17 months of your life because an investigating officer had a conjecture.
The Supreme Court actually warned about this exact scenario back in 2024. Justice Surya Kant, while hearing a bail plea, explicitly said, quote, "Prolonged incarceration pending trial amounts to unjust deprivation of personal liberty." But saying it from the bench is one thing. Actually preventing the lower courts and agencies from doing it is another thing entirely.
We often hear that phrase in Indian legal reporting: the process is the punishment.
And this case is the absolute textbook definition of that phrase. In India, especially under stringent laws like the PMLA or UAPA, the actual conviction rate is notoriously low. For the PMLA, it's something shockingly low, like less than 1%. But the detention rate is incredibly high. The system is quite literally designed so that the jail time happens before the verdict is ever delivered.
Right.
So even if you win, like the AAP leaders did today, you've already lost those years, you can't sue the state to get that time back.
And we have to talk about the triple test for bail, too. The standard test: are you a flight risk? Would you tamper with evidence? Will you influence witnesses?
Right. And Kejriwal met that test easily back in 2024. Everyone knew he wasn't going to run away. He's the sitting chief minister of the capital. He's not going to pack a bag and disappear into the night. All the files were already seized by the CBI. And yet, the case dragged on until February 2026 for a simple discharge. The legal framework allowed the investigation to essentially become a form of political detention without conviction.
Which effectively decapitated a major opposition political party for 2 years based on evidence that didn't exist.
That is the undeniable political reality of the situation. Whether you support the AAP or not, whether you like their policies or not, the objective fact is that their top leadership was systematically removed from the playing field during crucial election cycles based on a case that has now completely collapsed under its first real judicial scrutiny.
So let's look at the reaction, because this isn't just a legal victory in a vacuum. It's absolute political rocket fuel. It's February 28, 2026, the verdict drops. What was the very first thing Kejriwal did?
He went straight to the Hanuman Mandir in Connaught Place.
Of course he did. I mean, it's almost a ritual for him at this point whenever there's a big event.
It's highly symbolic. Him, Manish Sisodia, Sanjay Singh, all three of the alleged master conspirators, now free men, bowing before the deity in public. It immediately frames the narrative for the voters as truth triumphs, Satyamev Jayate. It connects him right back to the common man and taps into that deep religious sentiment.
And the emotional angle was pushed very strongly, too. Sunita Kejriwal, his wife, gave a very public statement right after the news broke.
She did. She thanked Shiva Shakti. She talked openly about the family's immense suffering, her own illness while he was away, his elderly mother crying at home. It humanizes the political battle in a way press releases can't. It reminds the public that these aren't just abstract political figures fighting on TV. They are sons, husbands, fathers who were physically taken away from their families.
But then, right after that, the politician came out. Kejriwal held a massive press conference, and he did not sound like a man who just barely escaped a jail sentence. He sounded like a man completely on the offensive.
He threw down the gauntlet. He challenged the prime minister directly on national television. He said, and I quote, "I challenge PM Modi to hold fresh polls in Delhi. If BJP wins over 10 seats, I will quit politics."
That is supreme confidence, 10 seats out of 70.
It's a massive flex. He is framing this entire 2-year ordeal as a, quote, lust for power by the PM and Home Minister Amit Shah. He's essentially saying to the voters, they couldn't beat me at the ballot box, so they tried to beat me with the CBI, and they completely failed.
He's using the discharge order to completely rewrite the narrative of the last few years. It's no longer, I successfully defended myself in court. It's, they attacked me because I'm better than them at governing. He even compared their infrastructure work. He said, I built 500 schools, you go build 5,000 schools. Then people won't even ask about Kejriwal.
It's a classic textbook Kejriwal pivot. Turn the grueling legal victory into a platform for moral superiority. He's positioning the Aam Aadmi Party not just as innocent administrators, but as the active victims of a tyrannical conspiracy. And in politics, victims who survive and fight back become heroes.
But the BJP and the CBI aren't just taking this lying down, right?
Right.
I mean, they can't just fold their tents, apologize, and go home.
No, absolutely not. The CBI has already issued statements saying they will challenge the discharge order in the Delhi High Court, quote, immediately. They are publicly arguing that the trial court ignored several crucial aspects of the investigation.
Which is kind of their standard boilerplate response whenever they lose a big case. The judge missed something. The judge didn't understand the complex money trail we laid out.
They have to say that. Institutionally, they cannot admit the case was baseless from the start because that admits to malicious prosecution, which opens up a whole other can of worms. But politically, the BJP is in a very, very tough spot right now. How do you campaign in Delhi against a man who a special court just declared completely innocent in a scathing 600-page order?
Union Minister Sukanta Majumdar tried to counter it on TV today. He pointed out that PM Modi was also questioned for 9 hours by agencies back in the day regarding Gujarat, and he didn't complain of misuse of agencies.
Yeah, there's a bit of whataboutism happening there. But the context is wildly different, and the voters know that. Being questioned for 9 hours in an office is a stressful nuisance. Being jailed in Tihar for 17 months is, well, it's jail. It's a complete deprivation of your liberty and your life.
Exactly. It's a total false equivalence. It's like saying I had a really bad meeting at work versus I was locked in a cage for a year and a half.
And the victim card is very, very potent for Kejriwal right now. The BJP has to tread carefully. If they push too hard on the High Court appeal without presenting magically new, undeniable evidence, they risk looking like they're just endlessly hounding him, and that will only increase his popularity and sympathy among the middle class.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've got free politicians, a legally scolded CBI, and a looming High Court battle. Where do things stand?
As of today, February 28, 2026, the status quo has massively shifted. Kejriwal and Sisodia are free men regarding this specific case. The charges are officially dropped, but legally speaking, it's not 100% over. The High Court could theoretically hear the CBI's appeal and overturn the discharge order.
But momentum is a real, tangible thing in both law and politics.
It absolutely is. A discharge from a special court, especially one this detailed and this critical of the agency, is a very heavy anchor to lift. The CBI has a massive uphill battle to convince a high court judge that the lower court was completely fundamentally wrong when it boldly stated there was no iota of evidence. They need to find that iota, and they haven't been able to find it in 4 years of searching.
It really feels like a turning point,
Yeah.
not just for the AEP, but for the way we, as citizens, look at these central agencies.
It is, and it raises a final provocative thought that I think every listener really needs to sit with after the headlines fade.
Go on.
The court didn't just discharge 1 or 2 people, it discharged 23 people today. It slammed a multi-year investigation as being based on mere surmises. This raises a critical existential question for our democracy. We have agencies like the ED and CBI that wield immense, almost unchecked power. They can arrest constitutional authority as a sitting chief minister and keep them in jail for months or years.
Based on evidence that a court later finds doesn't even exist.
Exactly. So what are the checks and balances? If the PMLA and its incredibly stringent bail conditions allow the state to bypass the need for actual evidence at the arrest stage, is the law itself becoming a tool for political containment rather than a tool for justice?
That is the truly scary part. Because at that point, it's not about whether you are actually guilty of a crime. It's just about whether they can keep you in jail sufficiently long enough to break your political momentum and ruin your life.
The judge explicitly warned about an unhealthy precedent, a system where the search for truth is completely replaced by the construction of a narrative. We really need to ask ourselves if we are comfortable living in a system where the government's narrative can keep you in a cell, even if the truth eventually sets you free years later.
It forces us to take a hard look at the approver system, too. If you can literally buy testimony with the promise of bail, is any case against any political opponent safe?
It fundamentally undermines the credibility of the entire judicial process. If the public stops believing the investigating agencies are acting in good faith, then the rule of law starts to crumble. That loss of institutional trust is the real casualty of this case.
A very sobering thought to end on. We always hear that justice delayed is justice denied, but justice detained. That's a whole other problem entirely.
Indeed, it should be a wake-up call for the higher judiciary to step in sooner, to demand evidence earlier before the process itself becomes the entire punishment.
That's it for this deep dive into the Delhi liquor policy verdict, a day that will definitely go down in the political history books and probably in law school textbooks too. We'll be watching the High Court appeal closely, but for now, the slate is clean for the AAP. Thanks for listening, and stay curious.
Stay informed.